Welcome, everybody. Episode 71 of the Mere Mortals podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about something that's pretty common. Common sense. Or is it?
You'd
we'll
hope
see.
so.
We'll see. We're going to get into the definition. We're probably going to have a bit of background around common sense. If it is common to us, what it means to us all. But as always, Mere Mortal moment of the week. Kyrin,
I'm going to kick us off.
what do you got?
So, effort will always lead to a top 10% outcome, I reckon. So,
You're going to have to explain that one.
As I was just doing things during the week, and I was thinking, okay, so when we're talking the past couple of weeks, we've been talking a lot about effort versus efficiency or efficiency versus effectiveness, and effort played into that, and how does the effort play into all of our other things in excellence as well?
Yep.
And I was just thinking, I think basically anyone barring, a real like mental or physical incapacity, anyone, if they choose to pursue a goal, I think can manage to get in the top 10%, even if you're not naturally good at it. So what I was sort of thinking was, I have basically no natural talent at music.
Not at all.
It does not come to me.
I thought you were just going to say you have no talent at all.
No.
Just a full stop.
No.
But no, I agree. Music, yes.
And I genuinely think, like, if I put my heart to it, I could get good at something related to music. So maybe not particularly playing a musical instrument like a cello. Maybe I'll never be top 10% in that, no matter how much I tried and studied and what. Like, I'd never get into the top 10% of people doing that. But I genuinely believe, like, if it was just the music industry as a whole, I could probably find some niche where I was the top 10% of, dudes editing out particular sounds or blah, blah, blah. And so when I say top 10%, I'm sort of imagining, like, I'd be able to earn a moderate income from it, as in you'd be good enough that people would want to pay for your services. And so what that requires, I think, if you want to get to the the higher levels, that definitely requires the luck and the talent and the natural ability to do something.
Yep.
But I genuinely believe anyone can do that. And it was just sort of like a reflection on the week where I was, I was just attempting some things. I was like doing some video editing and was thinking, like, oh man, what's the point of doing this? Like, I'm not that good at it. It's not something that naturally comes to me. But, reflecting on it, I was like, you know what? You just got to put the effort in, Kyrin. You're not putting enough effort because you'll be able to improve and get better.
Yep. Okay, I like that. Mine is an interesting one. It is just simply good. I think we tend to say this, like us in our normal day-to-day life. I think we picked it up obviously from Jocko, but we say it here and there, not all the time, but sometimes. And the reason I bring it up is good is because this week I completely forgot about even thinking about a Mere Mortal moment of the week, because usually I get a printed out piece of paper with all of my thoughts and we're going to be discussing.
Yep.
This week was fairly busy and I deprioritized that particular thing and I wrote it down in an actual book. So I've still got the analysis behind it. But then just as we were talking, this podcast began, I looked down and I'm like, I don't even have a Mere Mortal moment of the week, which became good. So sometimes, just saying that statement, the specific way that Jocko explains this, Jocko Willink, for those who wants to go and check it out, is if you can say good, it means you're still breathing, it means you're still living and you can keep on going. So I think sometimes when you just forget things like the Mere Mortal moment of the week, you can sometimes go, okay, good. Yep, totally forgot. Good. Fine. Move on, learn from it, improve from that. So I like saying that good. I like when you say it too. Sometimes we'll be just talking about crap and it'll be like something horrible happened and I'll be like, good. I wish it rained more.
Yeah.
Always wish it do worse.
All right. So common sense, and we'll kick off with why you wanted to talk about it, I suppose.
Well, I think the reason this particular topic, I reckon, while kind of easy-ish to define, I think it's lost a little bit on like how common is common sense. And I'm always interested when people say they expect you like, oh, how could you not possibly know this? It's so simple.
It's common sense. Yeah.
But, it totally depends on the aspect of how much you know of something. Yeah. And I think it also showcases how humble someone can be when they are quite experienced in a particular area. I think common sense, while you think about it from the very surface level, I think it's an interesting topic just to discuss is like, what is common sense, what isn't, how is it built, how is it, what was it thought about hundreds of years beforehand. But even just looking at deeper into the layer of, someone who's thinking that someone's not doing something out of common sense, is it truly their issue, or is it perhaps that you just are more experienced in a particular area, and you just can't seem to see that other people are still on some sort of learning curve or learning progress to understand that, okay, they probably wouldn't know this just because I'm at a certain level. Yep. So yeah, I thought it'd be an interesting discussion. So definition, I'll kick us off.
Nice.
A good sense and sound judgment.
Yep.
Right. Simple, easy, in practical matters. Now, it said in practical matters because I think generally with common sense, you associate it with like things that everybody does, as opposed to, if you're a rocket scientist or something, or the Schwarzer equation for black hole radius or whatever it is, just because Schwarzschild, what is it? Schwarzschild radius. There you go. So we could say, well, it's kind of common sense to us of how to calculate that if we saw the equation, but if we show that same equation to someone else who hasn't encountered it, they're probably going to be like, well, what the hell is this? So it's not in particular common sense, I think, to niche things. It's more the practical matters of life. Do you have a different definition at all?
Basically not technically based and not based on a knowledge in the sense of a fact, I would say. So, for children or something crossing a road, you wouldn't really say it's a fact like that a car's going to come, so you should look both ways. It's more, okay, this is something you should do and double check when you look to the left, look to the right, and look to the left again.
Yep.
So yeah, it's definitely shouldn't be related to knowledge things like you were mentioning with obscure knowledge. Definitely not. For me, I wanted to put my own little branding on it as well. So I definitely agree with the sound judgment as well. It's meant to encapsulate as large a span as possible. So you'd say that someone maybe in Africa has the same common sense as someone in Europe, and it doesn't matter if you're a guy or a girl or trans or whatever. Like, it doesn't matter. It's you as a human, and it's not related to, I guess, your particular circumstances.
Yep.
And I think I'd be comfortable as labeling someone, if someone didn't have common sense, I think I'd have to be comfortable in labeling them as like insane or crazy. So if someone doesn't have the common sense to look both ways while crossing the road, I would say, yeah, they're crazy. Like, and legitimately mean it. I say, I call people crazy all the time, but I don't mean it. But in that case,
this is an actual, it's meant.
I actually mean that. I think that person is crazy, and I would be uncomfortable spending tremendous amounts of time around them, or sleeping in the same room as them, or things like that. So that's sort of my own little personal definition of what it is. And once we get into some concrete examples, we'll see if that holds up or not.
Yep.
But that was my own way of putting on it.
Yeah, okay. Of defining it, contextualizing it.
So kick us off, Juan. How
did you do this? When I was doing a bit of research on this, there's this guy I came across, Duncan Watts. Did a TEDx talk, 2011. So he,
I watched it.
Okay. So if you want to go watch it. He was a physicist, and then he did his PhD in engineering. Then he became a sociologist and all this stuff, and worked at Yelp. And
the talk is called "The Myth of Common Sense."
There you go, the myth of common sense. The whole thing. So he had his own definition, right, of what we rely on to navigate concrete everyday solutions. So I guess some of the examples he provided for common sense, and this is what I want to talk about, was, okay, so one was, how you dress for work versus going to the beach. So is it truly common sense that if you go to the office, you shouldn't wear board shorts as opposed to like long pants? And here's where it gets interesting, because he gave that definition, and it's super extreme. So it's probably quite right. And it can be quite right to a certain extent. But then if you can get into some real extremities where, say, whether it's potentially like Fiji or other islander countries where it's actually totally acceptable to go to the office wearing a skirt for a male, because that's just like the outfit that you can choose to do so. You look at a little bit more constrained. There's things like in Silicon Valley, a lot of people go to the office there, with jeans and shirts, and that becomes like this tech sort of outfit to wear, as opposed to button-up shirts, suits. And you still, even to this day, I could envision a lot of people when you go to the office, right? First time you ever go to the office, I don't know if you ever experienced this, where you'd go, oh, how much do I kind of dress up? Do I overdress? Do I underdress? Like, what should I wear?
Yeah, not in that sense, but for like interviews and meetings. I've
Right.
heard that, yeah.
So to me, I think it's common sense to a point. A lot of these things. One of the things I kind of took away from him was it's to navigate concrete everyday solutions. But one thing I think I forgot to probably say is that it's up to a point of like whatever the cultural or contextual space that you're in. Because then once you like sort of breach that barrier, and I don't think you can really define it clearly, but it's a little bit of a gray area where you go, oh, okay, now you can't just say that this is someone not having common sense. Now it's a point of like, okay, well, that's information that they just weren't aware of that they could have known.
Yep.
I don't know. Did you take much more from that particular?
Okay, well, that was getting like a little bit fuzzy and hazy. So say you went to Silicon Valley and you rocked up in a Hawaiian shirt and everyone else there is dressed in button-ups and stuff.
Yep.
Would you say that you were lacking common sense or someone else did that? Would you say they were lacking common sense?
No. See, I wouldn't say they're lacking common sense.
Okay, I would.
Okay. So for in your definition, why do you reckon you say that person would be lacking common sense?
I would guess because it's obviously a new scenario for them, so they probably should have asked around first.
Yep.
And I think like the common sense in that would be, okay, I'm going into an unknown scenario. I should probably find out like a little bit of information first. So, maybe if it was someone who didn't speak the language, though, for some reason coming into this, work scenario, blah, blah, blah. But even then I'd be finding a really hard way to justify why they didn't pursue like the knowledge or gaining that knowledge of what they needed to do in this scenario.
Ooh, okay, maybe we're hitting onto a better point there. So I think it's not the direct common sense of like the action or what you first think about. I think it's a sort of secondary information gathering that where common sense is lacking or existing. So same thing. Let's say you go to work, you rock up in a Hawaiian shirt. What do you have at this particular Silicon Valley company? Their status is you can wear whatever you want. There's people in there with bikinis. There's people in there with suits. Everyone's wearing everything. You fit right in.
Yeah.
So someone would say, oh, fantastic common sense. Yeah, you can rock up with everything. Now, obviously that's a particular sector. If you're working in banking in Australia or in like Singapore or Asian countries, you're wearing a suit. Like that's what you're wearing. Doesn't matter if you go to work on a Monday and you're just chilling out with your people at the office. That's what you're wearing. That's like the standard outfit.
Yeah.
And sure, and in that context, if you rock up in a Hawaiian shirt, then I'm going to be like, okay, that's probably not the common sense because you can get that information. But I probably step it away from the actual whether the person wore this or didn't, or say, now the other example was like, if he rocked up in front of people who were just talking and started talking like he was doing a TEDx presentation, they're going to be like, what the hell is this guy doing? It's just out of context. Like, sure, you can do it in one particular context, but not in that scenario. I think the common sense question of whether you're actually understanding what you should be doing is more embedded with the information or learning prior to something. So if you don't have the common sense to learn about something in the prior sense before it occurs, I think that's where common sense would be lacking. Well, that's what I would say, like, okay, you've lacked common sense because you didn't go and investigate something that you should have done.
Yeah.
Not so much the action that you took afterwards, because that can be correct and not correct in many different variations. So it doesn't actually hold true. It's more the prior knowledge of, okay, well, did you go and actually check this? Did you go and do that?
Yeah. And that's the thing with it. It relies on, I guess, knowing so many unrelated facts to what is actually the occurring, like the one little occurrence. So let's take another example like that. You're in a company and they say you can wear whatever you want to work, Free Dress Friday or whatever it is.
Yep.
And so you rock up like in a gimp suit, like arseless chaps. You're just showing everyone your body hair. There's like, an equivalent of a little paper book worth of covering on your body. And black spikes everywhere. Like you're going the full,
just so everyone knows, that's the Mere Mortals.
I'm just describing my
that's our outfit Monday through to Friday. On the weekends we wear some clothing, but Monday through to Friday.
This
that's
is
us.
a serious gift. And So you rock in and you say, it was Free Just Friday. The paper said I could wear whatever I wanted. You told me I could wear whatever I wanted.
Yep.
Obviously, that's still going to be out of context. That's still going to be inappropriate. It's still, there's maybe one company in the world where that would be appropriate, blah, blah, blah.
Yep.
But every other scenario. And you could say, okay, well, what was so wrong with that? Why I did what you said I could do. But it's all the other things related to it. The company wouldn't want to be seen with someone like that, dressed like that, walking in and out of their company clothes. There's the women on the workforce might be put off, and probably the men as well.
Probably the men. Everybody.
Yeah.
If you rocked up in assless chaps, I reckon everybody's going to be put up.
Exactly.
Seriously.
Unless you've got top 10% ass in the world.
Yeah. You got to put some effort into it.
So, that's related to all of those, knowing all of those facts. And you'd say, okay, well, that's not, and that's where common sense comes in. I suppose it's being able to know 100 different little facts that add up into this one sort of super fact, which say you shouldn't do that. Like that's a bad idea to do. What it was also talking about in that talk was it's real, like hindsight is clarity sort of deal. So one of the things he talked about in the talk was there was a guy called Paul Lazarsfeld who had a 1947 review of an old study, which was of 600,000 Americans in the army or armed forces. And they were asking them just general facts and trying to get, what's like a good soldier? How do people fit into the army? Like blah, blah, blah. Just trying to find out all this stuff. It was called the American soldier. And so he came up with this finding that while reviewing it was, men from rural backgrounds fared better than men from the cities.
Yep.
And I was actually going to ask you this and see what you thought. Obviously, you've seen it.
Yep.
So he was saying, you'd be able to predict that. You know that knowledge, and you go, that's sort of common sense. People from the rurals, they're better at working with their hands. They've got more experience probably shooting guns. They know how to live on the land. They're more outdoors more, so they're more used to different scenarios and things like that.
Yep.
And so he's telling you all of this, and you're nodding along going, yeah, that makes sense. Then he goes, aha, I gotcha. It was actually the opposite. And it was actually the men from the cities fared better than, fitting into the army, fared better than people from the rural backgrounds. And so then you go, oh, you know what? That sort of makes sense as well. They're more used to working in corporate structures. They're more used to interacting with unknown people day in, day out. They're more used to blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
And so what he came to was when every conclusion and its opposite appear equally obvious, once you know the answer, there is a problem with the concept of obviousness. And that sort of comes into the common sense because if you say, okay, that's obvious, that's common sense. But in this scenario, both are obvious. So there's no real, common sense with that particular question. And so that sort of gets to, the fact of common sense being you sort of, if you're using it in a future sense, maybe it's useful. But if you're looking at it as a past, as in someone did something wrong and you go, oh, well, that's common sense, you shouldn't have done that. Then you could also go, okay, but from my point of view, it's obvious because I see
when you look back on it, obviously, how could I be so dumb to not know that?
Yeah. But when you're in the, before the event and looking forward, both seem obvious.
Yeah,
it's just definitely. As in this situation where I said, okay, who would fare better, men from the city or men from you could come up with equally good arguments.
And you can do that, looking forward at anything, almost everything. And that's why I think that's the reason it's called the myth of common sense. I think it's because when you look at it backwards, there is you can't just look back at events that have happened and say, oh, well, that was obvious that it's common sense that should happen because, you can, footy games, there was a footy game last night. Whatever team could have won the next day, anybody could have analyzed and said, oh, well, of course they're going to win. It made common sense because they had these people come back and blah, blah, blah. And if the other team won, well, of course, because these people came back and they weren't that great. So you can make a story and make yourself believe whatever it is, depending on what happened in the solution. But beforehand, you can only analyze based on the information that you have.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting with common sense. I think that the biggest danger I found with common sense, right, was with common sense, you get locked into following norms, right? Because so I'll go to the example of common sense, say, what are we now? Say 10 years back.
Yep.
I'm sure that if you had asked anybody in the world, hey, you have $100 million, what do you do? And if you said, well, you could say you have two options. You can just go relax, go and invest in a couple of companies, or you should try and create the world's biggest car company, electric car company, and beat everyone else. And even though it hasn't worked for a lot of people, you should just do it and throw all the money. And you'll need like $1 billion, but just do it with like 80 million. Everybody would have been like, this is not common sense. Like, that's just dumb, sounds dumb. And then if the person says like, well, I'm also going to be doing a rocket company. And then someone's going to be like, well, for 40 years it's been done by China and the USSR, Russia, and we pay them already. And this is already like dumb. Don't do that. Fast forward now, you look back on it and it's a little bit like, well, gee, of course Elon Musk had to go down that path with all the people that helped him out. And, he's obviously making a ton of money now. He's worth $70 billion as opposed to $200 million that he used to be. And the Tesla's going fantastic. Like, of course, makes sense. But at the time, there would have been very few people on Earth who would have said, yeah, that makes sense. Or it's the obvious thing to do.
Yeah.
So I think common sense that's obviously a very unique scenario where someone decided to just pursue that and keep on going down this path of not common sense. But it can hold everyone back from very little, not comparing it all the way to that level, but say from a work perspective, say the common sense is when you're finishing off, let's say like years back, 30, 40 years back, or even now, if you're filling in timesheets, you fill in your timesheet on the piece of paper. You just write, Monday I work this hours, Tuesday I work this hours, Wednesday, and then you hand it off to your manager, and the manager gives it to the senior manager, and then it goes into a computer somewhere, centralized, right? Imagine you go into this company, there's 1,000 people, everyone's doing this, it's common sense. Like, it's just become, that's what everyone does. Now you come into the company and you're like, oh, why don't we just buy a software that's like, $100 and it'll save you 2,000 hours of like effort every week, and you'll be saving X amount of money and whatnot. To all the people in the company, they because it was so stuck in the norm and everyone was doing the same thing, it was to them the obvious choice. That was the choice to do it.
Yeah.
And it took until someone came out, from external perspective and went, well, that's not very sensible. Like, that's not obvious at all. You should be doing this. This is common sense. You should be using digitalized versions of this because you can do that. But the problem is, and I get back to the lower level, is that everyone in the context of that company, say of 1,000 people, two things. One, you're stuck in the norm of where common sense is whatever that group believes common sense is. And they haven't gone down the path of looking at further information to see, oh, okay, well, actually, no, we can improve our common sense or how obvious we are doing here to improve our efficiencies or effectiveness and everything like that.
Yeah.
So I think that's and I've experienced that many times, in both sides, where I've, as a consultant and contractor, right, I've been the opportunity to like go into places where the way people are working or interacting, I'm like, wow, like to me, it feels like no one's got common sense here. Like, why would you not do it this way? Why wouldn't you try to deliver the product in this particular way? You can see like, oh, all these things are missing, but always hindsight. Because then it's almost like hindsight. It's almost when you look at it in like from external out, it's like you're seeing if, like it's already happened because you're like, oh, well, I can see what went wrong. Of course, duh. But I've also been in the experience where I was deep in sort of a particular work team doing some stuff, working. It just feels like you're like tearing through going. And then someone external kind of says, oh, by the way, you guys are not doing this in the most obvious way. Like there's no common sense here. You guys could have done this and that and that. But you're so stuck into it that you just don't see that.
Yeah.
So both stuck in or like the norm of it is like, oh, well, we're always told to do this. That's how it's done.
Yeah. So I'm going to apply my own definition there and say that's where I think we're starting to confuse good ideas and efficiency, effectiveness, all that sort of stuff, and wrapping it up in common sense.
Yep.
Which, I don't think could be the useful way of doing it. So with my definition, I'd say, that person coming in, maybe if someone on the team who was, doing the writing out and stuff and when they were presented with these basic facts of saying, if we implement this, there's 100 hours saved, like you instantly get back 10-fold, 20-fold return on your cash.
Yeah.
If that person fought against it, like bitter tooth, claw, nail, I'm going to quit, I'm going to destroy the company, I'm going to set everyone on fire if we implement this, then I would say, okay, they're lacking in common sense.
Yep.
But most people would just probably be like, oh yeah, it could work. I don't know if it will work, but maybe it would be, and maybe they even have a strong opinion saying, no, I don't think this is going to work.
Yep.
But I wouldn't say that that's like a lack of common sense. I'd say that's and I guess like other intrinsic things to them. Same with the Elon Musk. I would say no, that's not common sense what he did. He took huge risks.
Oh, definitely.
He took basically everyone was saying, don't do it. This is a bad idea. You're going to waste your money. Don't do it. And he had the non-common sense. I would say that was where he was lacking common sense. But that's sort of why you need those people. You need those crazy risk takers. And unfortunately, only 1 out of 100 of them is going to succeed.
Or deeper than that, like 1 in like millions.
We're not talking about Doug Lichtenstein, who did exactly the equivalent amount of risk, equivalent amount of stuff, and just lost it all. Like we're not talking about him, but we are talking about Elon Musk because he broke through the barrier. He did it. Yep. So I guess I would say like what would push an individual outside the spectrum, and that would be their risk profile. So for Elon Musk, that obviously he could handle a huge, tremendous amount of risk, which would put him outside the common sense.
Yep.
Someone with inherent interests in something. So if you were really, really interested in crochet or something like that, and to the point of I'm only going to crochet Kermit the Frog, and make a business out of it. Most people would say, okay, no, don't do that. But there might be one person who would go, okay, I'm going to do it, and they manage to somehow do it. They beat common sense in a way.
Well, it's where you hear like when he defies common sense. When someone goes against common sense and then achieves something.
Yeah. So I'm going to pose a situation for you, and you probably heard about this in the TEDx talk. But say you're going into your normal building, you're taking the elevator to the 5th floor, press the button, you open it, and you're on the second. So you're already on the 2nd floor, so it's coming up people from the 1st floor, and there's 8 people in there, and instead of facing out, looking at you, they're all facing the wall.
Yep.
What do you do in that situation? Like, what would be the common sense in there?
Well, see, the common sense would be to face along with them.
Yeah.
That would be the thing. Yeah.
So group behavior is also, 100% influencing what you think this is. So that's the problem, I guess, with using common sense. It can be like very context dependent.
It's totally context dependent.
And so, and that's why it's such a frustrating term, because you'd think like you just plop anyone from anywhere into this scenario and they should be, common sense, figure out what's the most appropriate way of acting. Yeah. But it does depend on, the person as well. And that's why it's probably like, I guess if we're talking about common sense, I really feel like we should use the word in the sense of that everyone would agree with the same thing. Yeah. And so most of the descriptions we've had, I'd say we're probably not common sense ones, more you just needed to have more knowledge, you needed to have that's people just acting differently. Yep. And it's more reserved for people who are crazy and insane. That's where I would say, okay, they don't.
Well, it'll almost sense. Okay, so based on that, it almost makes me think, because one of the ones I was having a look at was a lot of people think, like, imagine today, do you know how to tie a tie? If you could tie your own tie,
I do.
Okay, in the normal Windsor style.
I can do a double Windsor.
Okay, double Windsor, right?
Yeah, so I can do a Windsor.
Okay, so you can. Now, there's videos out there showing people how to do a Windsor tie. Yeah, right. But there's also not just a Windsor tie. There's like multiple ways you can do a tie, right?
Hundreds.
And if you talk to people, maybe from a generation back, it seems to be that a lot of people, they know how to tie a tie. Like that's the thing we know how to do. Sure, it was the fact that they also wore a lot of ties in a generation past, as compared to now. But it's interesting. I was listening to this, and they were talking about how in the previous generation, to them it feels like, it's common sense. Everyone should know how to do this. But you could go back, I think it was like to the 1800s, where there was all these books written about your etiquette and how to tie your ties and why you should tie your ties this way. So there was all this information already that people learned, that got passed down as information, and that got sort of shared around. It's not like as a human being, you know how to tie a tie. That's not how it works. It's not that level of common sense. And it started making me think, so from what you were saying, you can only really attribute common sense to like really core foundations of a human, as in like almost like life and death scenario. So when I'm looking at all the way back to the definition, good sense and sound judgment and practical matters, I'd probably say it's more in practical matters of like life and death. So if you, like you say, walk across the street and not look left or right, or if you think jumping off a cliff without a parachute or something like that, then you have no common sense. I think that's the extreme that I'd say, okay, that's going to fit all human beings, where when it's life and death, you're not doing things that as a human being can prevent you from dying. That's when you'd be like, okay, this is no common sense, and also associates with like, you're crazy. Like you're crazy. You don't have the common sense to just be a normal human being. Anything else below that level though, I think you can't apply there's not such a thing as common sense to it, because it's just so contextual. So just because, with cooking, like I'll take cooking for me. So I'm like, from a cooking perspective, I know how to eat food and cook my own food, but it's very specific to me. Like it's very simple, no mucking around. Sure, I could go up a little bit of a level in terms of my cooking. Both I don't care and don't want to. Cool. But someone who's a really good cook might even be like, well, geez, there's no common sense there. Like, you could be adding this and this spice and doing this extra to make it taste so much yummier.
Yeah.
To me, it doesn't matter. I'm like, it doesn't matter at all. But then in the same sentence, from a gym perspective, in common sense, I could be saying to someone like, someone comes to me and says, well, I want to lose 12 kilos in 10 months. I'll be like, that's easy. Just do this, done. And while in saying it is one thing and doing it is a separate thing, it's still then, that for them, it's like, that's not, like, to me, it's not common sense. So I've known that. To me, it's totally common sense. And I think because it's so contextual to what you know, what other people know, I'd almost say that common sense, like Will TEDx talk said, I think you should just remove that from vocabulary unless it's like specifically needed for those life and death situations.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, I'd back that. That. So if we're doing this though, what level is it required for it to be common, do you think? So if there was a situation you put someone in, and let's just make up one, you're passing by a pond and you hear like strange noises. You got your earphones in, you hear strange noises off into the pond, and you like look around and you can see like an arm flailing out of the water.
Yep.
And what percentage of people would it require for you to think, okay, this is obviously not a normal situation. I probably need to help this person, like, or put that all together and realize, okay, there's a person in there drowning.
I don't know. That's pretty high.
Yeah.
I'm thinking like it's going to have to be like 98%.
Yeah, I was saying like 1 in 1,000. If you'd need to have one person look at that and think, okay, that's a normal scenario, and just keep walking on with their day.
Yep.
That would be the one person who doesn't have common sense, that that there's something wrong with them. They screwed up big time with that one.
Although, see, the thing is that you can still create scenarios where maybe in some particular countries or things or events that are happening where
really?
Yeah, like you could just be like, that happens.
Yeah,
that's a thing.
Is that what you think they do in Scandinavia?
Well, not Scandinavia,
swim
but
around with arms.
No, well, one of the things I was looking at, Black Hawk Down. So with Black Hawk,
that one person, man.
No, it's me. It's me. No, I'm thinking from like Black Hawk Down. So I've read that particular story, the actual book about it, and there's one of the particular pieces that happened was they dragged all these dead sort of like rangers and special forces people. All the people that had died, they tied them up to the back of trucks and just like drove them around on the back of trucks until their bodies like disintegrated.
Yeah,
right? Pretty much. And not just like kids, families just watching all of this stuff happening. Now, to them, do you think it would be in common sense to like perhaps stop that or try to put a stop to that?
Obviously not.
But it wasn't, right? So there is places in the world where it's like, okay, that happened.
Where
right?
something crazy happened.
Yeah. So you can't, and that's why I'm like, even with common sense like that, it's still very much dictated to places of what exactly is happening. And that's why, unless it's like, to me, I think unless it's true extreme, like life and death to yourself, where almost not as like a conscious human being, but just purely like your animalistic nature of like, fight or flight, whether, amygdala response when you're just not listening to that at all, and you're going completely off kilter with it, then it's like, okay, I'd say that's where common sense is like lacking. And you'd almost, that almost starts to get to the point that you're like putting someone in a place of like, okay, you're like something actually wrong with you mentally to be lacking this sort of common sense.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess the difference then is you added a whole lot more context to that scenario. So, if I
exactly, yes, exactly.
It was a country in Western Europe, or it was a non-wartime scenario, then you'd probably be like, oh, okay. Yeah.
Here's a better question, I think, in better explanation, just to give the listeners something to think about, right? Imagine there's a population on Mars. 100 people on Mars.
Yep.
Us as human beings, can we say what the common sense of people from Mars are? What's like, so if you spoke to someone on Mars or they spoke to you, right? So a completely different planet. There is, because you have no context, you can't even say what their common sense would be. Like to them, and perhaps there might be, if we start theorizing, I'm sure there'll be some commonalities that they have, maybe eyes or something, who knows? But if you're just having a discussion with someone who's completely outside of Earth, because then it really takes away from like everything that we know about to something we have no idea about, you can't even say what's common sense to them. What it should be common sense.
I think you can.
You think you can?
Yeah, I think if you're talking about aliens, like sentient aliens, yes, that's just completely out the realm. Like so far into the realm of unknown that no idea.
But I think
if they're humans and they were born on Mars, I think we'd be able to agree that there's some sort of underlying
commonality.
But
so think about it this way: sentient aliens, right? You have literally you have no context.
Yeah.
You can't impose common sense on them, nor can they impose common sense on you. And that's where, again, it's contextualized. So common sense to us is to the human realm. Like it is to our race. You can't even go and extend common sense to another race or another entity or another. And that's where it's like, it is bounded still. So if you're ever truly going to use common sense, you can only use it, I think, you should use it to yourself in that life and death scenario or things that affect that. Because using it into other areas, it's just, you can inject more information to the point that all of a sudden it breaks down the barrier of common sense or not. Because, this 7 things happen and 17 things here, and you didn't do this and you didn't that. Like, oh, okay. I understand now why you didn't.
Yeah.
And I think people hide behind that a lot. Like I've met a lot of people who, not that they say the word, oh, it's common sense, but it's like they say a lot of like things like, oh, it's obvious, or why didn't you know this?
Yeah.
To the point that if they really thought about it, there's a reason behind it. But to them, they're so like focused on the fact that they know this, that it just seems like silly that no one else would know this or would do it in a particular manner. So I think people hide behind common sense more than it hinders more than it helps, this particular topic.
Yeah,
common sense.
So you got down a interesting road there and wanted to pick up on it. So technology. And this was one thing I saw in some of the YouTube comments and stuff when I was looking up this whole avenue of discussion.
Yep.
And they were saying technology allows us to think less. So do you think common sense has declined? Do you think we have less common sense now than someone from 1930s, for example?
Well, I think just my definition now that we got to with common sense about life and death as opposed to anything else, I don't know how much it applies there, but in the general sense of just like knowledge, I think it has.
Yeah.
In a general sense, because just as a right off the top of your brain, you don't have to hold as much information as now, right? Just purely in the sense
Google.
Of, So like right now, if you don't know what all the countries in the world is, that's fine.
Yeah.
You could just go and Google them all.
Or how far it is from, London to Moscow or whatever.
And so you don't have to be at that point wrong nor know about it. You can just find it and you're fine.
Yeah.
As opposed to in 1930s, maybe it was common sense to know that Brisbane was 1,000 kilometers north of Sydney.
Yeah.
But if you didn't know that, maybe you were lacking common sense because like, oh, how did you not know this? But they can't actually go and verify this on a search or anything like that. It's more like, they read it, someone told you, or you looked at an encyclopedia or something else. So I think generally, if we're looking at that description, I think, we've got less common sense because we don't need to have that much common sense I guess, now as compared to, many years ago.
Okay. I'd say it's about the same. I don't think with my definition of calling someone crazy or insane, I don't think we're, calling any more people any more crazy or any more insane than perhaps they did back then. Maybe even less. We've gotten more common sense because we've, managed through modern medicine and stuff, managed to get rid of some of the worst things of schizophrenia or whatnot, or like, epilepsy. There's drugs to control that now. So people aren't going to, have an epileptic fit and whatever, fall onto a train tracks and you'd be like, oh, they lack common sense. It was more, okay, no, they just didn't have, full control of their capacities and whatnot. So, I would, if anything, I would say we've got slightly more common sense now than back in the day. But,
I don't think, if I had to be gun to my head with the definition of it just being like what everyone expects common sense to be, then but if I said life and death, then I'd say, it'd just be the same, because it'd just still be the same. You'd still be the same humans in the 1930s as you are today.
Yeah, exactly. So one other thing was I watched the Artificial Intelligence podcast a bit, and I really enjoy it because, I just find that topic really fascinating and what people are doing with it. And I suppose because it gets into like the technical, how the brain works and like how people are trying to either recreate brains or do different things or use large data sets and things like that. And there was one particular podcast with Melanie Mitchell, who she had a program called like the Copycat program. And I'm not going to get into all the details because I can't even remember them particularly, but it was essentially like using large sets of data to like create concepts and analogies to try and create like common sense, I guess. And they got onto the topic of like, okay, what is common sense? How is it used? And honestly, all I took from it was it is laughable how little, the people trying to create common sense or define it, how laughable it is that they just have no idea. So there's people trying to use it from, I guess, like we were sort of mentioning of like a knowledge-based list that sort of expands out and connects with each thing so that it's, not just dependent on one single piece of fact, it's dependent on, a wide spectrum. That is not working. There's, they're trying to use concepts and analogies. That's not working. And however they're going to do it, it'll be surprising to me if like they create something that's obviously very intelligent and has something that's common sense. I'll be very surprised if they can explain how they actually got it. I think it'll be more just like they just applied data or whatever and algorithms, and it somehow came up with it on its own.
But see, that one there, and it strikes me like the example I gave you with the alien, because you could say the same thing with the robots. So imagine this, right? Same thing. They want to have, with a huge amounts of data and processing, get to a point where a robot or an algorithm is able to interact and have common sense. So obviously one is, we're having a bit of difficulty describing common sense. Imagine if you had to write this down to like teach someone. How do you teach someone what common sense is in like a very general way? It's incredibly hard. Or to talk about everything that should be common sense, like laughable. You can't really do that. Now, imagine these robots, or say Teslas, driving on their own. Is it common sense that, it's a whole question of if this car crashes into this post, so you say there's two Teslas going past each other and they're all speeding at 200 k's an hour for some reason, who knows? Now, they can either choose to like crash against each other and kill 5 people, or one of them can veer off and kill the passenger and the other people like stay safe, right? So, the computer might end up, if the category of like humans staying alive, it might decide that, common sense says it should kill this one person instead of these 5 all together. Or I think we've said this in the past, it should kill a 19-year-old lady because she's closer to death as opposed to a 2-year-old kid in the other car, right? Now, that is common sense if you look at it from a particular lens. Humans look at everything in all these variable sort of spectrums, and we all have a little bit of a different, setting when it comes to different things. So someone might be a little bit more in the safety and dare, someone might be a little bit more somewhere else. But even in this particular matter, imagine that this algorithm or computer or AI, decides, this is what common sense is to me. It might still be completely different to us because, we as humans, we just have a what we would want to call common sense. That might be completely different to this computer. To them, it might be like, oh, common sense to me is the only reason I exist is to create a paperclip. So it's like the paperclip maximum, where, you know, if you want to maximize the amount of paperclips, maybe you'll destroy everybody and you'll just keep creating paperclips. That might be common sense to that algorithm. And it's right. Like, it's right too, that when we're trying to force, so I know that in this particular example is they're trying to find common sense that fits within the spectrum of humankind, like to our race, what we expect common practice to be. But doesn't mean that it could objectively get there. And in fact, it could find its own common sense and it'd be correct. So yeah, it's a danger. It's a very interesting thing.
Yeah, I wouldn't even bother really applying it to aliens or unknown, unhuman things.
Yeah,
non-human things. I think, yeah, common sense definitely needs to be if we're talking about it, and it's going to be a useful word in the English language.
Yeah.
And I don't know, in Spanish, is it sentido común?
Yeah.
Something like that. Do they use, is it used the same?
Yeah, it would be.
It would be.
It is.
Yeah,
it is.
So yeah, I think it definitely should be like a solely human thing that we're using just for our context, because getting outside of it is
look, I mean, to me, looking at the topic and going deeper into it, I think my takeaway would be to just not use common sense in place of, you know, actually understanding where people come from and information that's sourced from. And you should actually rebel against it at times when, if it's common sense to a lot of people to do a certain thing, maybe looking at it the other side and being like, okay, why is it that everyone has been going down this path? You might actually find the truth being like, well, it's because we need this for whatever. Like, you know, if you see like, why is no one jumping off this cliff? And then you look down, you look at the cliff and it's like, oh yeah, there's like a massive rock there and you will die. Makes sense. Yeah. But, you know, if it's common sense that everyone's like going onto Robinhood and buying, investing in the company Hertz, which has gone bankrupt in the US, you know, everyone who's doing that might think, oh, it's common sense. Yeah, we should do this. It's like, it's a smart idea. You know, maybe have a think about just at any point where it almost seems like it's common sense, to see whether it's true or not, to validate it with yourself.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. For me, if I was going to sum it up, I'd say, 100%. It should be used a lot more sparingly than it is, and probably only in a case where I'd say, okay, that person is crazy. It's
crazy.
And as a little takeaway, bonus gift for everyone. If you want to find out if you have common sense or not, you can look it up on YouTube. There's a couple of videos saying, do you have common sense? And what I found from that was they are absolute rubbish videos. They do not test common sense. They're puns and riddles. So if you want to get infuriated, because you're going to get all the wrong answers, because it's sort of
just
stuff
dumb.
Like, yeah, it's just I'm trying to think of one where it's like what would you say to someone who doesn't have all the fingers on one of their hands? What was the word you described that as?
Fingerless?
Fingerless, exactly.
Yeah.
But they said, everyone has fingers on both hands. So it's obviously that, you know, that's not common sense. It's just playing with words and whatnot.
Yeah.
But the comments on the video were pretty fun. So if you get infuriated, you can make it up with the joy that you can get from reading the comments. So if you're going to do that, read both. Now, Juan.
Yep.
We'll get onto the fitness challenge, but common sense tells me that you have 0 points. Common sense tells me that I have 0 points. So let's just skip it. No one's interested anymore.
Good. We're gonna revamp that. We're gonna revamp that in the future.
Yeah, we'll see. I'm not sure that other people really get that much benefit from it. You know, it's more of a personal thing between you and me. So,
well, I think we're gonna revamp it in a personal sense. So that'll improve over time for us. But we might just leave it out for now. So I think us keeping on saying 0 is probably not helping out anybody.
Yeah, exactly. But common sense, Juan. If someone's gotten to this point, what does common sense dictate that they do?
Look, I'm
going to call you out now. If you don't subscribe right now, you're crazy and you have 0 common sense.
By now, common sense things. If you are up to episode 71 and you don't follow us in all the platforms, you're crazy and you are an alien. Welcome to planet Earth. I am Juan. I will be your savior.
Mere mortal Juan.
Go and check out all of our stuff everywhere. Mandatory. Assertiveness. You should do it. Now go like, go subscribe, go follow TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, website, wherever we are there too. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been Common Sense. This has been the Mere Mortals podcast. Juan out.
Kyrin out.